The history of any country is always bound with unrevealed secrets, sacred places and riddles which scientists have been trying to solve for decades. Kazakhstan is an ancient land. Its history keeps a lot of glorious names, events and facts, some of which are still covered with myths and legends. The Time Puzzle crew tries to understand the intricacies of ancient and modern mysteries of history, traveling around the country and visiting its most amazing corners. In today's episode, the history of the Kazakh police, unusual incidents, surprising and contradictory facts. Since the end of the 40s of the 20th century, Alma-Ata, previously known as the most peaceful city of the Soviet Union, has become the criminal capital of the USSR. Hundreds of robbers of various qualifications wielded the streets. Peaceful citizens lived in fear because there were rumors that, in addition to pickpockets and burglars, a brutal gang was operating which kills people even for food cards. The entire staff of the Soviet Almaty police was raised in alarm. The operatives worked days and nights, identifying unreliable citizens and detaining criminal elements. They used an agent network and practiced unusual methods of investigation. When did the first police actually appear in Verny? Military fortification did not need any police regime. How did it happen that former prisoners and exiles got up to guard the public order in the city? The revolution brought new trends, new changes in urban life, in the life of the whole state system. The Black Cat Gang in Alma-Ata, truth or fiction? And we often asked him about this Black Cat. Unusual crimes, odious individuals and dark facts in history. Watch all this in this episode. According to the historians, the first public order service, and simply the police, appeared in France in the 18th century. The very word the police goes back to the German Polizei, which in turn comes from the Latin politia. And the roots go deeper to the ancient Greek politeia, which in translation means state affairs. Hello, my name is Andrei Slozhin, this is the Time Puzzle, and today we will learn what are the roots of the police of Kazakhstan and in particular of the city of Almaty. Until the end of the 17th century in France, the term police meant caring about the citizens. Only at the beginning of the 18th century, the police began to exist in the form in which we know it now. It was the French police that had a huge impact on this structure in other countries, including the Russian Empire, and accordingly on the origin of police in the city of Verny. We were told about all this by local historians of Almaty. The city began with military fortification. Military strengthening did not need any police regime. In the military fortification, in the garrison commander is the Tsar, the guard and the military commander. Therefore, it is only possible to speak about the police of our city when the military fortification of Verny was transformed and received the administrative status of the city. That's when the first city governor appeared here. In 1878, the Turkestan General Governor Konstantin Kaufman issued an order for the formation of a police department in the city of Verny, which consisted of the governor and his assistant, an interpreter and a clerk, a letter clerk at that time. Governor was elected, so the post of governor, a candidate was elected to whom the police obeyed. I mean the functions of police, that's it. So the chief of police appeared.
Полицмейстер руководил, если можно так сказать, верным.
The police chief directed, if I may say so, 2 police stations in Verny. Police stations themselves, at the same time, had districts in their subordination, where district guards worked. And the most ordinary of these police ranks were gorodovoys. Now we would call them patrol guards.
Современным языком говоря, постовые.
Police officers surveyed pubs, markets and other hotspots. They wore their uniform only in the headquarters or office and walked the streets in civilian clothes. Anyone could appear to be a police officer, a janitor, a footman, a cabman or even a vagabond. The main task was to blend in with the crowd and cause no suspicion. In addition, every officer had its own agent network. Janitors and cabmen, of course, were the main informants. They spent most of the time on the streets of Verny. Nevertheless, the main keepers of calm in the city were the policemen. The policeman is the lowest rank, which had a zone of responsibility of 500 people, one policeman for 500 people, because they had to know each person by name and patronymic, and they had to know them all up to the 7th tribe. The functions of the policeman included checking sanitary standards, state of improvement, supervision of fire safety, as well as investigation and record keeping. Everything that was connected with some kind of disturbances or with some events, connected with the social life of the city, with some social events, it was all. The police was always in the know, and they had to resolve all sorts of conflicts. They wore a uniform, usually such a black one, if you saw in historical films. Since 1884, the police had to look like this. The police officers, horse guards and policemen had to have an infantry sword, a Smith & Wesson revolver or a gun in a black lacquered holster. Police officers had a whistle hung on the metal chain on the right side of the uniform, and they wore narrow black shoulder straps with a red edging. The janitors were also equipped with whistles. In the event of any incident, a janitor or policeman could show a sign that assistance is needed. They detained, as a rule, small thieves and raging drunkards. In general, it can be said with certainty that the police of that time had a great service and the city lived without much shock. But one day, everything changed. After the rebellion in Verny on March 3rd, 1918, Soviet power was established. By June 22nd of the same year, city guards appeared. Their first boss was Georgy Kazakhov. By November 10th, 1919, the city guard was renamed as the militia. Thus began a new stage in the history of law enforcement officers. The revolution brought new trends, new changes in urban life, in the life of the whole state system. For example, a huge role in the formation of the Soviet militia in Verny was played by prominent political figures, revolutionaries, such as Abdrakhman Aitiev, Chimbulatov, Magaz Masanchi, Tokars Bulken, Dmitry Furmanov. Former officers of the Tsarist police were shot or sent to camps. Someone simply fled abroad. Those who were on the other side of the law came to power. Former convicts began to follow the order. To emphasize their position and stand out among other Bolsheviks, new representatives of the rule of law wore special distinctive signs. The head of the Museum of the Department of Internal Affairs of Almaty, Bekandil Barakat, told us about this. At that time, they didn't have any uniform clothes, and people wore their everyday clothes. They only wore a bandage, workers and peasants militia, 3 letters, WPM. The uniform for police officers was introduced only in 1922, and it had to be put into service everywhere by 1924. But right after the change of power, the word militiaman became common rather than policeman, as it was under the Tsarist regime. In the criminal world, there have always existed their own special names for fighters against crime. Law enforcement officers have many different names and insulting nicknames in a criminal environment. But in 1920, almost all the citizens of Verny called them in a strange way – elephants. Where does this name come from? There is a story and very few people know about it. An interesting story happened in May 1920. After that, Soviet militiamen in Verny began to be called elephants. The circus arrived here. It was located on the shopping area, the current Green Market. But on Sunday, the Komsomols came to the circus because of Voskresnik, with orchestra, with songs, with dancers. And the elephants had just been brought into the tent. And then the music burst. Elephants were frightened, destroyed this tent and ran down towards the former bus station Sayahat. They ran sweeping everything in their path. And these militiamen, under the guidance of a trainer, managed to neutralize these elephants and bring them back. And all the way they said, "Get away, these are elephants. Stand back, these are elephants." And by doing that, they received that nickname, elephants. And literally the next day, people began to say about the police, "The elephant is coming." Of course, the police did not take offense at such a nickname. They simply did not have time. They had to follow the instructions of the Semirechye Regional Executive Committee on Combating Counter-Revolution, Criminal Crimes and Marauding. So the revolution lit up new names in the history of the Almaty militia: Magazi Masanchi and Tokars Bulken. They said, Masanchi will come, the Basmachi will flee. But now, in order not to offend anyone's political and national feelings, I must say, time puts everything in its place. And today we know that the revolutionary masses are people who have, for the most part, a criminal past. So, Tokars Bulken, who later also became the leader of one of the revolutionary detachments. He was also a highwayman. Magazi Masanchi's personality is also ambiguous and shrouded in many mysteries. So, for example, there are two versions where he was born. The first says that in the city of Verny, the second one in the village of Karakonuz, now is the village of Masanchi of the Chu district of Turkestan. There are several dates of his birth. The first, 1885, the second, 1887, and the third, 1888. There is no exact data about what he was doing before the revolution. According to one version, he was a cab driver, on the other, a farm laborer like his father. The information appears only in 1908, and after in 1912, he became a participant in the First World War in the rank of private. Local historians are still studying archival records in search of reliable information. Alexander Gordievich Voronov is one of them. Well, many of them have these fictional biographies, which are wrong. Now I'm working on this Comrade Masanchi. According to the archival data, Magazi Masanchi joined the party in 1918. The year before, he was elected to the Soldiers' Committee and sent to the Tashkent City Council as a representative of the garrison. There he took part in an armed uprising and the establishment of Soviet power in the city of Tashkent. In 1919, by the decision of the Turkmen's Commission of the Central Committee of the Workers and Peasants' Party of the Bolsheviks, Masanchi, as the head of the Muslim battalion of the Communist International, was transferred to the Semirechye, where he fought against the White Guards. However, Alexander Voronov considers this information inaccurate.
Много сейчас мифов по интернету ходит о том, что были какие-то мусульманские образования военные.
There are many myths on the internet now that there were some Muslim military formations here. Frunze himself was against these Muslim formations. And he says, in any case, do not create any formations or units according to religion. He let them create formations on the basis of nationalities, but not on the basis of the religion. The Turkestan Cavalry Regiment was formed in 1920 under the leadership of Masanchi. Already in 1921, Magazi was elected a delegate of the Third Congress of the Comintern when Frunze himself introduced him to Lenin. After this visit, he was appointed head of the Jetesu regional administration. Despite such a supportive attitude on the part of Frunze, not all people treated him well. For example, the authorized representative of the Revolutionary Military Council of the Republic in Semirechye, Dmitry Fumanov, spoke about Masanchi the following. For example, Fumanov himself, that he learned Russian language for 3 years of service in this battalion of Turkestan. Fumanov writes that yesterday evening sat at the proceedings, they killed everybody, they kill you, they kill them. So he barely spoke Russian. And how could he, in his statements, be in the regimental school and then teach soldiers how to use weapons, not knowing how to talk? I do not understand. Historians continue to study the biography of Magazi Masanchi. As it turned out, there are many dark spots and contradictory facts. Whatever it was, time will put everything in its place. Another no less significant figure standing at the very beginning of the birth of the Soviet militia in Almaty is Tokars Bulken. A native of Vernensky County of Karasu, Mainkum Parish, he graduated from 4 classes of the Vernensky Male Gymnasium. From 1905 to 1916 he worked as an interpreter for the Semirechynsk Regional Migration Department. But in 1916 he became an active participant in the National Liberation Movement in Semirechye, for which he was caught and taken into custody. After the fall of the Tsarist regime, Bulken was released and began to take an active part in the creation of Aul and peasant Soviets. Historians say that in matters of expropriation, Bulken not only succeeded, but also overdid it. There are some curious stories connected with these times. For example, Tokars Bulken, the commissioner for the confiscation of the wealthy people property, who, by the way, was studying at the gymnasium in Verny, who came to the revolution almost from the gymnasium bench. His name was associated with the stories of kidnapping girls along with the confiscation of the livestock, and it was repeatedly mentioned in some legal proceedings. It is unknown for certain whether Tokars Bulken suffered a punishment for the abduction of girls. There is no such information in the archives of the city. Who killed him is also a mystery. This happened when the young champion of the revolution was only 29 years old. Magazi Masanchi also suffered an unenviable fate. He was considered a public enemy and shot in 1938. However, Tokars Bulken and Magazi Masanchi at the very beginning of their activity in the Soviet militia were not seen in any dark affairs and perfectly coped with the tasks set to ensure order in the region. Despite such active work of law enforcement officers in the new state, there were still problems. The main problem was the lack of staff and their professional skills. Imagine 9 of 11 employees of the Criminal Investigation Department of the Semirechye region were illiterate. The 2 did not know how to write. To solve this problem, a regional school for the training of command staff was opened in Orenburg. A year after the opening, there were already 60 people studying there. Specialists were sent from Moscow. So in 1930, Ivan Svitnev came to the region. With his participation, a case about the theft of treasures from the Patriarch's sacristy of the Moscow Kremlin was solved. This high-profile case formed the basis of Yuri Klarov's book, The Black Triangle. Crimes, by the way, are incredibly popular subject for art. Another hero of myths, and almost everyone knows the Wyners brothers novel The Era of Mercy. Later, Stanislav Govorukin shot his cult film The Meeting Place Cannot Be Changed. It tells how the Moscow detectives of the criminal investigation are fighting the Black Cat gang. Do you know that a similar story happened in Alma-Ata? We did not have such high-profile organized criminal groups until the wave when evacuation rushed to us. Not only the film studio, factories, but also a huge part of the criminal world moved to Alma-Ata far from the fascist invaders. The Black Cat Gang was one of the most fierce not only in Moscow, but all over the USSR. In fact, in the 40s of the 20th century, there were many criminal groups that operated throughout the large country. And many of them were credited with membership in the famous Black Cat. Perhaps the Weiner brothers simply collected all the high-profile cases of that time and combined them in one book, diluting it all with literary fiction. But was there really a Black Cat in Alma-Ata? Surprisingly, one of the guests of the program, local historian Alexander Voronov, not only knows the history of the city, but also has a direct relationship to the Soviet police, since he served there for many years. There are more questions than answers in this story. In order to find out how it really was, I went to Alexander Godeyevich. Alexander Voronov came to the service in the Soviet militia from a dairy plant, where he worked as a mechanical technician of dispensing equipment. At first, he was a simple district police officer. A year later, he was transferred to a criminal investigation post for the position of investigator. So began his long journey in law enforcement. Of course, we asked Alexander Godeyevich about the Black Cat Gang. Some legends, well, as legends, they're always embellished right up to the veracity. But in fact, everything was different. We had a labor veteran then. When I came to the Frunzinsky district department, he was deputy chief of operational work, Belousov Mikhail Germanovich. And we often asked him about this Black Cat, because even here people talked about the Black Cat. He used to say, "It's all nonsense, nothing ever happened, it's all fairy tales and so on, that's all." There was no gang called Black Cat in Alma-Ata. This is just one of the most popular criminal horror stories of the time. Every city and region feared the Black Cat on its territory. The criminal world is divided into many castes and has a complex hierarchy: robbers, toolmen, thieves, scammers, and many others. At the beginning of the 20th century, in Alma-Ata there was a huge number of pickpockets and burglars. Among the burglars, there were also climbers, and one of the representatives of this profession lived here in Alma-Ata. Yashka Climber, or Yashka the Bulkov, was a short, thin man who could climb into the open windows of the houses. All the city militia knew about his adventures. Yashka managed to steal in all parts of the city, and the police could not catch the thief until one literally comical event. And they couldn't catch that Yashka in any way until he climbed into an apartment while being hungry. He climbed up, and there were delicious foods in the fridge. The guy ate a lot, then began to climb back into the window and got stuck. And the owner came back. He called the police. Yashka tried to set the case, but he was caught. Already by that time, the police had his fingerprints. So this unique windbreaker died in prison. An important milestone in the history of the Soviet militia can be considered the decree of the Central Committee of the CPSU of December 1965 on measures to improve the work of the investigative apparatus of the prosecution authorities and public order bodies. The issuance of this decree coincided with one event in the city of Almaty, which few people remember.
На окраине Алматы было огромное такое поселение цыганское.
There was a huge gypsy settlement on the skirts of Almaty. Several tabors came with the Baron of the USSR, that's how we'll talk. And here they introduced such a system, guys. The Nikolsky Bazaar, it was their estate. They did there what they wanted. They stole everything and resold it. And when it all began that the gypsies terrorized the Almaty, the local stewards didn't know what to do. And they began to look for an excuse how to get rid of this camp. Because the next measure after the adoption of the resolution of the Central Committee of the CPSU is the dismissal of at least the second secretary responsible for this work. The detention of certain gypsies did not lead to anything. At all interrogations, they claimed that they were working alone. The operatives faced another problem: how to decapitate the top of this camp or to make them leave the city forever. The honor of a Soviet policeman and shoulder straps of higher-ranking criminal investigation workers were at the stake.
Купили их на чем? Подослали к ним гадалку, вроде бы.
Do you know how they managed to do this? They sent a fortune teller to them, seemingly from their own. Well, we call it confidence. This fortune teller told them, a big trouble is coming, a state house, you are dying, you are being evacuated, and so on. And the gypsies were frightened. They broke up and made a lot of mistakes in a hurry. They moved to southern Kazakhstan, Chimkent. The second part moved to the Baltic states, and thanks to the wise work of the police, which separated them, dismembered and identified such accomplices at the local level, arrests began. That's how the last base of the gypsies was eliminated. But, however, it is impossible to eradicate absolutely all crimes, and as well as uncover them. But there are those committing of which can lead to an international scandal. One such a story happened to colleagues of Alexander Voronov.
К нам в парк культуры приезжал чешский.
The Czech Luna Park arrived in the city, Czechoslovakia. So one of those Czechs, when he was traveling in the trolley, 800 korunas, I still remember the amount, were stolen. Almost all the personnel of the Almaty militia were alarmed. The officer who was responsible for the area where the theft occurred, he knew all pickpockets on the territory entrusted to him. He decided not to beat around the bush, as the case was extremely serious. The operatives simply began to bring all those who were in the police's eyes to the club near the Central Collective Farm Market. As a result, they collected about 30 pickpockets. The detective went out and began a conversation.
Было уже, наверное, час или 2 часа ночи. И вот он когда мне говорит: ребята.
It was already 1 or 2 a.m. He then tells them, guys, such things happened. How? International scandal. What should we do?
И что там делать?
And then one woman asked, what will happen to the guilty person? Rylov says, nothing will happen.
Не ходите.
She, do not follow me, and went away.
Возвращаются без
She returned in 30-40 minutes.
урни.
It is in the litter box. Take it. Only there is no money. Rylov says, we will find them. All documents were safe. And how much surprise these Czechs had in the morning, how? Found in 1 day. That's what happened.
Такой случай.
There is another unusual story that happened to the investigator Voronov, how the criminal became a friend of the Soviet investigator. The first to tell it to us was writer Vasily Shupeykin.
Этот бандит.
This bandit, he was a real bandit of a real organized criminal group. He killed the guard of those merchants' warehouses, which we know as Pugasov's shop on the right bank of Malaya Almatinka River. The name of the gang leader was Anatoly Bakayev. The Soviet court gave him an exceptional penalty, shooting, but eventually the death penalty was replaced by 25 years of camps. After serving his sentence, Bakayev returned to the city. Voronov took Anatoly under the supervision as an unreliable citizen, as it was prescribed by the law. However, Bakayev did not return to the slippery path, but decided to become a law-abiding citizen. There was a legend like this. If the criminal decided to end his illegal activities, then the other criminals took revenge on him. Nothing like this. On the contrary, generally the criminals respected retired criminals, but at the same time, who was in jail for a long time, as they say today, it is very hard for them to socialize. It's very difficult to fit into this life. Nevertheless, Bakayev managed to get a job in a photo print kiosk in the park of 28 Panfilov guardsmen. And he was a photographer there, got a job there. He brought me a certificate about this. And after a while, a week later, he comes and asks for the permission to go to a wedding of his daughter. The daughter was marrying a cadet border guard. I could not give it to him. The wedding was at the Turkestan restaurant at the hotel. The chief says to me, "Go to the prosecutor." I went to the prosecutor. The prosecutor allowed. He says, we cannot turn free life into a prison. According to Alexander Gordeevich, Bakayev did not disappoint them and didn't betray their trust. After 4 months of Anatoly's stay at liberty, Voronov withdrew his supervision. Now a person started to live as a full member of society. However, several years later, Bakayev returned to the investigator with another question. What do you want? What do you need? You understand, I want to go to my son-in-law to the Far East. And there's a border zone. A person with criminal history cannot go there. What do you want to go there for? Well, you know, I want to earn some money there as a photographer. Well, there is only one thing you can do. I do not know if it will work or not. If your son-in-law, who's he now? He says he's already a lieutenant colonel. I said that if he leaves this border zone and meets you somewhere, then you come with him. And when the patrol will check you, he will say, he is with me, he is my father-in-law, well, something like that. Voronov's proposal worked. Bakayev not only got to the border area without problems, but he managed to earn good money there. He borrowed a car from his son-in-law and drove to the local villages, offering the villagers to take a picture for memory. There was no end to those who wished to do that. And when he arrived, he went back to the district department and said, "Thanks for the help." I say, "What?" "I've managed to earn a good amount of money. I'm rich." Later, Anatoly Bakayev received a medal for labor valor and continued his friendship with the policeman. Later, Alexander Voronov left law enforcement for a well-deserved rest in the rank of major and took up his free time studying the history of Semirechensky Krai and, of course, studying the birth of police and militia in his native Almaty. I believe a characteristic feature of that militia, we were always without weapons, and we were not afraid to go into the den. For how long I served, it was only somewhere in the 80s that one policeman was killed. This happened near the Medea, where those government dachas were located. The work of law enforcement officers was associated with a risk to life in any historical period. Anything could happen on service. Therefore, the militia or the police are given their service weapon. Of course, you could use it, but in this case, it was necessary to write a huge number of papers, explanatory. Therefore, the employees of the militia tried to work to prevent crimes.
Я вам скажу, что Алматы – это богоугодное место.
I'll tell you that Almaty is a godly place. We have never shaken the Soviet Union with such superhuman crimes. because both the Soviet militia and the modern police, they work as a rule to prevent crimes. This is the tradition of Almaty. The work of a policeman is, first of all, the protection of law and order in the life of people. They are on the line between the security of citizens and the gangster world, risking their lives. It would seem at first glance there can be no secrets and mysteries in the history of Kazakhstani policemen. In fact, it turned out completely differently. My name is Andrei Slozhin. It was the Time Puzzle. See you.